I've been debating sharing this story for some time, mostly because it doesn't have a lot of clarity. Something definitely happened. What it exactly was, I don't know. So let me set the stage. At the time, I was living in Traverse City, Michigan. Beautiful landscape for those wandering. Huge glacier carved hills and Lake Michigan at your back. I rented a little townhouse with a longtime friend a little ways outside of the city. I had just gotten a hold of my old bicycle, which I'd shipped up from my old hometown, and I was raring to start riding around, and that's how this all got started. It was my day off, and I decided to save gas and ride my bike into town. I geared up, checked my tires, and roared off. I had been big on riding my bike once upon a time, and it came back like, well, riding a bike. What I didn't notice, however, was how quickly I was moving. If I'd been paying attention, I would have realized the constant downward slope I was on, and how biking back up, it would likely pose a difficulty for my winter-lapsed muscles. But none of that mattered at the time. I made it into town, did some shopping, met up with my roommate for dinner, and generally had a good time till I noticed the sun was setting. So I hopped on my bike and pedaled off into the sunset. At first, I did alright, but that aforementioned incline wore me down. By the time I reached the last leg of my journey, it was pitch black, and I was walking my bike, at which point the road faced me with a choice. To my left was the regular road, which was better lit, but also a longer trek to get home. To my right was my more regular route to and from town. I drove it every day and had used it to come into town that very day, in fact. It was heavily wooded and unlit, but featured a shorter route, albeit with a steeper hill. I figured since I was already walking, I might as well just take the shorter familiar path, so I turned on my bike's headlamp and headed into the even greater darkness of the road through the woods. All went well for a bit. I trudged along and cursed myself for being so stupid and overconfident with my bike. Then I heard it. Footsteps off to my right side in the woodland. I stood still and they stopped abruptly. There in the darkness I debated what it might be, but as a veteran of the woods, I hoped it was just a local wildlife and continued on. The footsteps started again. They stopped when I stopped, just a hint later. I started and stopped once more, to be sure I wasn't hearing things. This last time, the steps continued for a solid 10 seconds after I had stopped, making me sure that something or someone was out there. I still do not know what, though I logically lean towards human as the gait sounded bipedal and more precise than a quadruped. With this in mind, I weighed my options. If I dropped the bike and ran towards home, it would be far too easy to catch me. The same was true even if I ran back towards town. I was not in any way prepared for a chase, and I didn't want to initiate one. My mind strayed to the utility knife that I always carry in my purse, but I shoved that thought aside. I have enough martial arts training to know the knife was a bad idea, and I was more comfortable taking whoever or whatever was out there barehanded, rather than escalating things with a blade. Instead, I called my roommate who was still in town, gave her my location, and told her what was happening. She told me she'd be there in 10 minutes. I hung up and started walking again. The footsteps started up too, this time faster and out of sync with mine. And that's when I got mad. I have a weird thing where fear makes me angry and hostile, and being stalked through the woods had officially punched my buttons from terrified to murderous. So I turned to the woods and roared, with a voice that I didn't know I had.
How about you come on out and face me, you piece of shit? I'll rip your stomach open and wear your intestines for a necklace.
For the life of me, I don't know where I got the guts or the words for that. It might well have been a bad move, but the woods were rather abruptly quiet and nothing came at me. I stayed still, staring hard, ready to beat the shit out of anything that moved. Nothing did. Then, my roomie came on scene, her headlights almost blinding me as she turned the curve to where I was. I tossed my bike in her car, and we hauled ours homeward. I collapsed once I got home, vomited from pure nerves, and finally fell asleep around 3 AM. And that's my story. I'm not sure of much, I'll grant you. Was it a person? An animal? I feel compelled to lean towards the former, for no better reason than because it sounded like a person walking. And what kind of animal would be so precise in its stalking and winding me up? But who knows? Maybe I just scared the shit out of some poor porcupine. Regardless, I'd rather not encounter it again. I always think I have no experiences appropriate for this sub, but thinking about times that I've listened to a gut feeling of foreboding, I do think it once saved my ass, or at least all of my personal belongings. Hear me out. This happened last year in Taiyuan, China. My husband and I arrived by train around 2 AM, only to discover that the hotel room we'd booked had been given to someone else and we had nowhere to stay for the night. This was not actually the first time we'd found ourselves on the streets of China with nowhere to stay that winter, funnily enough, so we were a bit stressed out, but not freaking out. We found a cheap hotel online, planning to stay one night and find somewhere nicer the next day, and took a cab over. It was hard to find, so when we got near, the driver called the hotel. A young guy in a tracksuit came out to the street to bring us up. He seemed pretty normal, if surprisingly energetic for 2 AM. He took us into a rundown building through an alleyway entrance, and we took the elevator up to the 9th floor. The hallways were unfinished, just bare concrete and exposed wiring. We're led through a slight labyrinth of these halls till we get to the hotel. It's one hallway of rooms, 4 in total. I was pretty on board with everything till we got into the room. Then I started getting a bad feeling. I thought I was just being prissy at first, because my primary problem was that there was no sink, just a bed and a glass room with a squatter and a shower. Then I noticed there was a small window by the bed leading into the hallway, with no covering on it. Then, while the guy was harassing my husband to try and wrangle more than the agreed price out of him, I noticed there wasn't even a proper lock on the door. I was really not feeling it at this point, and my gut was telling me that we should go. My husband wanted to stay. Remember, it's cold, it's 2 AM, we've been on a train all day, and we're fucking tired. But I insisted that we leave. That's when it got really weird. When we came in, there was no sign of another living soul in the building except us and the young guy that was showing us the place. No other guests, no other employees, nobody. The place didn't even seem to have a front desk. But when we started walking down the hallway, the tracksuited young man followed us and started begging us to stay. Then, all of a sudden, about 10 more people came out of nowhere, and they were all following us down the hall, begging us to stay, some of them yelling and touching us. I don't think so. This really freaked me out. So we left and spent the next hour and a half at a 24-hour KFC down the road, and ended up spending 3 times the price for a soft bed and some peace of mind. Worth it. This literally just happened to me, and now I'm sitting in my apartment, all the blinds drawn and the doors locked. I live in a city and work third shift, so needless to say, I've seen some weird shit at night. Due to my schedule, even when I'm off, I'm up the whole night. That being said, I was in the military and I've worked in security forever, so even though I'm a pretty skinny 5'7" and female, I rarely get nervous being out and about at night. Anywho, I live alone with no one to keep me company, but my cat and my fur child, a 6-month-old lab boxer. Around 4 AM, Pup went to the door and indicated that he needed to go out. Now, him signaling that he needs to go pee is kind of a new thing, so I jumped at the chance to take him outside. I bundled myself up, hooked the puppy to the leash, and out we go. To get to the stretch of land where the dogs are allowed to use as bathroom, you have to walk past one other apartment complex and up a hill. It's late, so it's dark, but the apartment parking lot, which runs alongside it, is well lit, so I've never really felt nervous or that it was too dark. Pop starts to sniff around, and I light up a cigarette and watched with what was probably a disproportionate sense of victory as my dog pees outside. Suddenly, Pop stops midstream. His entire body went still in a way that I'd only ever seen concerning squirrels. His ears perk up, his tail is straight up. Then, slowly, his ears start to pin back, his tail quivered, and a low, angry sounding growl I'd never heard my pup make starts. At the same moment, I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Some long, buried instinct flared up, and I became instantly wary. I turned around, and put my back to the brick of the nearest apartment building and scanned the parking lot. Nothing. Nobody out walking their dogs, no one out throwing trash away or walking to their car, no one on their balcony. Pup's growling started to get louder and louder, and he'd actually started to lower his head. At this point, I'd gone completely still, and my reaction to his discomfort was so severe that I'd fallen back on old habits and curled the palm of my hand to hide the cherry of my cigarette, so I wasn't giving off as much light. This is pointless, by the way, as I was out in a seafoam green North Face and brown Uggs that stand out like a beacon in the darkness. Never mind the fact that I was standing underneath the light. At this point, I'd pretty much decided to note the fuck out and head back to my apartment because I trust my dog's judgment of the situation. I started shuffling towards the walkway that would lead me back down to my entryway, hesitant to even turn my back to the area despite the fact that I couldn't see anyone. To my surprise, Pop started following me without any complaints. Normally, he would fight tooth and nail to avoid going back inside. I didn't want to turn my back to the lot, but I also didn't want to just stumble backwards down the hill. Finally, I decided, fuck it, and just swung around and walked briskly back to my apartment. As I was going up the outside stairs, my dog paused at the top landing, just before I reached it, staring behind me. I punched the code to get into my building before turning around, holding the door open, and standing at the top of the hill is a man. I'd never seen this guy before, but he was just standing there and watching me from the path I just walked, and I had no idea where the hell he came from. Pop was still growling, and so I moved back, pulling him inside. I made sure the door was shut and locked, then ran up 3 flights of stairs to my floor. I paused at the top where there is a big window, and the guy had moved further down the hill and was just standing there, watching me. I backed up and passed the fire door, but I still didn't feel safe even when it closed, and me finally removed from the guy's sight. I ran back to my apartment and locked the door. I called my apartment's 24/7 helpline, but despite the fact that it's called a 27 helpline, no one was there. So, right now, I'm eating cookies with a huge-ass Bowie knife, watching Rocco's Modern Life, and my poor pup probably still needs to pee. I have no idea how I'm ever going to take him out late at night again. I was 19 years old at the time, had been out of school for a year, and the year had not been a good one. I had opted out of college and had only been able to find a restaurant job in the tiny town where I grew up, and was still living with my parents. I felt like a loser. My closest friends had either gone away to college or had gotten jobs in the nearest major city and had moved away. The following year, a relative of my dad's helped me get a job with a company. It didn't pay much, but had great benefits, and I had a future and a chance to advance. I got an almost new car and was on my way, excited about life again. To celebrate, I was spending the weekend with 2 of my friends who were already living in the city, in this great apartment where all of the college students lived. We were planning to go out to this club. I had a painful breakup right out of high school, and because of the restaurant where I worked hours and hours, I had not been able to go out and meet guys and hang out with friends at all. Anyway, my 2 friends and I, all 3 of us female, were planning on a night of partying. I was hoping to dance, socialize, etc. So, The first thing we did after work was go and buy new outfits to wear out, come back to their apartment where we did our hair and makeup, and I was ready to go. My friend, Gillian, said that she wasn't feeling well and decided to stay in, so the other friend and I took off for a night of fun. We had my new car and we went to this club that was very popular in the city at the time. My friend told me that it was usually pretty crowded, that a lot of the college kids and people our age from the surrounding counties and from the general area hung out there, and the music was also great. That Friday night, I guess something was off. There wasn't many people in there, but there was a group of baseball players who were in town to play the local university. Since we were too young to drink, we ordered a Coke and basically drank it all night. Neither of us had much money. I danced with some of the baseball players, but most of them were gathered up around the bar hitting on the two female bartenders, and when they found out that I didn't do one-night stands, they were not interested in me at all. My friend, however, this guy, one of the baseball players, had kind of attached himself to her, and they basically danced the whole evening. At some point, the club became emptier and emptier as the baseball players and a few other people in there gradually left. At this point, I'm bored to tears, disappointed in how the night was going, and wishing my friend would come on, so we could either go to another club or go back to the apartment. But I think I just sat there for hours. Finally, it's around 1 AM and the club was closing a little early because there were so few people in there. My friend informs me that we are giving this baseball player, I'll call him Bill, a ride back to the motel where he was staying. I knew the motel. It was completely on the opposite side of the city from where the apartment was located. I was not happy, but it had been a while since I had gotten to hang out with my friends, so I wasn't going to refuse. Bill went outside while my friend went to the restroom. I came out a few seconds behind him and he was on the phone. He was telling someone on the phone that he would be back at the motel shortly. For a brief second, a little red flag went up inside me, but it was gone before I had time to think. I just wanted to take him to the motel and get it over with. Well, the three of us drove there. He sat in the front seat with us. We got there and he doesn't get out right away, like you would think. After all, it's around 2 AM at this point. He just stayed in the car and was making casual conversation with my friend, while I was sitting there thinking, just get out already. But once again, I'm a nice person, didn't want to get on my friend's nerves, etc. But even she was starting to get restless, because it just didn't make sense for him to just sit in my car the whole time, practically talking about nothing. Well, us two small town girls didn't have the car doors locked, and all of a sudden, there was this huge guy besides my car and another at the passenger side. Bill, the guy we'd given a ride to, gets out of the car and casually walks away. These two guys started pulling us out of the car. I had dealt with issues with the guys that I had grown up with, but once I got the point across that no means no, they just didn't back off, and I felt like that was the situation here. So, I wasn't afraid. My friend and I were even sort of laughing about it at first. We thought they were just joking around. We both grabbed hold of the steering wheel and were hanging on for dear life, and I was trying to explain to this guy why we were not getting out of the car, and he reaches in, grabs my middle finger and bends it back painfully, and I let go of the steering wheel then. He pulls me out of the car, and the other guy had my friend out, and I didn't really see what was going on with her as she was behind me, but I could sort of hear her struggling with him. The guy that had me by the arm starts dragging me across the parking lot towards the stairs. He was about 6'2", built, athletic, and was actually good looking. I had noticed him earlier at the club, and I was wondering what was going on, but I was still not accepting the fact that I was actually in danger. All the while he's dragging me, first across the parking lot, then up the stairs. I'm steadily talking to him about why it's not a good idea for me to go to his room, and anything else I could say to try to get him to let me go. I was trying to pull my arm away from him, but he had me in a death grip. I was 5'3" and 115 pounds. The whole time, I'm talking to him and struggling with him. He never says a word. He was stone cold silent. He dragged me to the open door of a motel room and shoved me inside, and there were baseball players everywhere. Some were in the bed sleeping, some were on the floor sleeping, some were sitting around watching TV. The guys who were awake looked up at me curiously. I was trying to not step on any of them because it seemed as if they were literally everywhere. This guy dragged me over to the bed nearest to the restroom and made some guy who was sleeping get up, and then he shoved me onto the empty space the other guy left. At this point, I knew I was really in trouble. Some guy came to the door and I stood up, and when I did, he basically body slammed me backwards back onto the bed. He went out to the door and was standing just outside on the balcony thing, talking to the person, and I decided to take my chance and run. One of the guys sitting on the floor grabbed the bottom of my skirt. I presume he was trying to stop me, but he didn't get a good grip, and I was able to keep going. My friend and I met at the door. She was coming from the opposite direction. We took those concrete stairs in some sort of dressy shoes. I was really scared of falling, but I took 2 steps at a time. I glanced behind me, and 3 guys were after us, and I really didn't know how we managed to outrun them, but we jumped in my car, locked the doors, and took off. When we spun out of the parking lot, they chased after us. When we got to my friend's apartment, we were sort of freaked out and in total disbelief and shocked at what actually happened. I felt really nervous, and I did not feel like I could go to sleep, even though it's now the very early hours of the morning. We decided we would go to an all-night fast food joint and drink some coffee and talk about what happened. I had gone into the other room to grab my jacket, cause even though it was May, it had gotten sort of cold, and then we hear a knock at the door. My friend at some point had told Bill where her apartment was. We stayed inside and really quiet while 3 of the guys banged on the door and yelled for us to open the door. Finally, someone else in the complex yelled if they didn't be quiet that they would call the cops, so that's when the guys left. We were too scared to go outside to get coffee at that point. We did discuss calling the cops, but we rationalized that this town loves their sports and they would probably take their word over ours. I know now, in retrospect, that we should have reported it to the university, but we just didn't think about it at the time. This happened approximately 2 years ago, and I almost completely pushed it out of my mind, until I was reading some other people's posts. So, anyway, about 3 years ago, my mum and stepdad separated, and her, my sister, and myself moved out and into a new place. It's in a decent neighborhood, not like a nice neighborhood, but a safe one. It's quiet and mostly elderly people and young families are here. So, moving in, I never felt unsafe. And since this incident, I haven't either. But probably about 6 months after we moved in, there were a couple of strange occurrences. One night, my mum was out for the night because she works as a relief worker for women's shelter, and the hours are pretty sporadic. I'm 16 at the time and stay home with my 10-year-old sister to watch her. At around 9:30 PM, I order us a pizza because we're watching a movie together and hey, I'm a nice sister. Around 15 minutes later, I notice some lights outside of my house and assume it's the pizza guy, which is a little weird because they're never this fast, but I wasn't about to complain. So I get up to the window to just check and see that a small blue car pulled up on the side of the road in front of my house, turned off, but the driver isn't making any move to get out of the car, or any movement at all. They're just staring straight ahead. At this point, I still think it's the pizza guy, and I'm like, what the fuck? Get out and just give me my pizza already. But he just keeps sitting there. Eventually I realize that this guy is not here to give me my pizza, so I sit back down and just figure that he's waiting for my neighbors to get home. Another 20 minutes pass and the pizza actually arrives, at which point I start getting uncomfortable because I notice the car is still parked outside my house and the guy has seemingly not moved. Like, let me explain. It's not like this person was sitting still casually in their car or playing on their phone or listening to music like normal people do while they would wait for someone. But sitting straight upright with their arms rigid out in front of them on the steering wheel. This was strange. Additionally, the pizza guy asked me if I knew the guy in the car because he said that he pressed his face up against the window and stared at him as he walked by and approached by my front door. So, I take my pizza out and eat it. Eventually, my sister passes out and I turn everything off and go upstairs. Every hour or so, I go back to check if the car and the man inside are still parked outside my house, and every time, they are. And he's still sitting there the exact same way, until I check again at around 2 AM. Now, he's moved from the driver's side to the passenger's seat and has his chin resting on his hand, looking out the window, which is facing towards my house. I start getting really weirded out at this point, but still don't do anything, convincing myself that I'm overreacting. So, I go back upstairs and wait another hour and a half before checking again. It's around 3:30 AM at this point, and I think maybe the guy is waiting for me to fall asleep so he can break in and rob us or something. I don't know. So, this time, instead of leaving the lights off when I pulled the curtain to check if he was still there, I turned them on so he would know that I was still up. I also held my phone up to my ear, hoping that he'd think that I was calling the cops and leave. I didn't actually call the cops because I figured it's technically not illegal to park on the road outside someone's house, and I didn't want it to turn out to be nothing. At that point, he starts getting out of the car, and I thought maybe he was just getting out to get back in the driver's seat, but instead, he closes the door and leans against it, putting both his hands in his pockets and just staring at me. I can't see his face because directly across the road there is a street light, so only his silhouette is visible. After maybe 30 seconds of him staring, I get too creeped out and pull the curtain shut again and call my mum. She's concerned and tells me to deadbolt the door, and if he does anything else or just doesn't get back in the car, to call the police, which I agree to do, and she hangs up. Finally, an agonizing 2 minutes later, I work up the nerve to peek out again, and he's still just standing there, staring. Now, I actually start dialing the number for the police, and just as I got to hit the call button, he abruptly looks up towards my neighbor's house and jumps back in his car. I found out the next day it's because my neighbor opened the front door and looked out at him. Apparently he'd noticed the weird guy too. But weird guy still doesn't leave. He continues to sit in the car, looking towards my house until 6 AM. I stayed up this entire time because I couldn't sleep. I don't know exactly when he decided to drive away, but the last time I checked, it was 6 AM. Also, looking back, I'm not sure why I didn't continue calling the police. So anyway, finally I go to bed and try to write it off as just a weird dude. For the next few days I spend the nights at friends' houses and just keep busy because it was the summer holidays. When I get home, my mum tells me that every day since I've been gone, a blue car has driven past the house really slowly and honked, but she doesn't recognize the driver. And when she walked outside to take a picture of the car license plate, after it had driven by 4 times, it sped away. She called the police and reported the weird behavior as well as gave a description of the vehicle, and they said that they'd keep an eye out for any other incidents involving a car matching our description. 2 weeks after this, the car is parked outside of my house again, but no one is inside, and it sits there until it's towed away. And that's it. I never received any other explanation beyond the fact that the car was stolen over 3 months ago in a town nearly 5 hours away. That was one of the weirdest and creepiest experiences I've ever had. Alright, well, this happened to me 14 years ago, when I was in 4th grade. Back then, it was very common that every morning before school started, kids would be dropped off at the park, and from there, we would walk to the school before the bell rang at 8:30 AM. Keep in mind the park is right next door to my old elementary school, so there really wasn't much of a distance or any danger for that matter. The one and only road that led to the park and school had lots of traffic and people walking around. So, my mum drops me off, and since we were pretty early and my friends were already walking towards the swing set in the park, I told her that I would go there with them and wait for the bell. Mum said it was fine, but to not get to school late, or else I'd be grounded. I quickly agreed and said goodbye to my mum and headed straight to my friends. Now, in this park, way in the back, there is, or was, a wooded area that you can go in for maybe half a block, and then you turn into a fence that separates the farm and the park. It was a very cool area to run around and play in, and the swing set where my friends were hanging out was maybe 30 feet away from the trees. As I'm getting closer to my friends, I saw something shift next to a tree, and I stopped to get a better look at whatever it was. That's when I saw him, a tall man with greasy brown hair and dark clothes. He was way in the back of the park in the tree line, just looking around, not doing anything that would cause alarm. So I dismissed him as just a man walking around, or one of the farm helpers that we would usually see from time to time, feeding the chickens or fixing the fence. I went on to talk to my friends, but I kept getting a bad feeling. Fortunately, my parents were very good at teaching me to listen to my instincts and be aware of my surroundings whenever I am near strangers. Feeling a bit weird about that man, I told my parents that we would start to head out to the entrance of the school, but because it was 7:45 AM, they didn't want to get stuck in the cafeteria waiting to be allowed into the playground. I started to get upset because the bad feeling I had was getting worse. I felt kind of trapped, and it was clear to my friends that something was up with me, but they dismissed it as me being in one of my bad day moods and continued to goof off and be loud. I looked around still feeling nervous and looked towards the woods. He was still there, except this time he was looking at us. He had a cold look in his eyes, and I could tell he was angry. That's when he saw me staring, and I quickly looked away, trying to play it off. Unfortunately, that gained his attention, and slowly he started to make his way to us. When he got close, he smiled at us and in a very friendly voice started to ask general questions about what we liked and what kind of video games we liked to play, what school we went to, stuff like that. I stayed quiet and just listened to my friends answer his questions without hesitation. The man then turns to me, the only girl in the group, and with a creepy smile tells me that I have beautiful black hair and a pretty face. I quietly and nervously thanked him without looking at him and moved closer to my best friend Josh. He was a 6th grader and the eldest of the bunch. When Josh saw how nervous I was because of the man, he held my hand and moved me behind him. The man looked annoyed that Josh did that and moved around him to be closer to me. At this point, I looked over to our other friends and they finally realized that something was very wrong, but they were just as afraid as I was to do or say anything. The man kept saying that I was so beautiful that I looked like a pretty doll, and just kept saying all these compliments that a stranger should never tell a little kid without the parents' presence, and even that iffy. At this point my instincts were telling me to run or to cry out for help, but I was petrified and I couldn't move at all. The man then started to touch my hair while complimenting me and said how he would like to take me home, how I'd be his special little doll, and how he would buy me toys and lots of pretty things. He then grabbed me by the arm and pulled me closer to him. Thankfully, when he did that, it snapped Josh out of his fear of what was going on, and he pulled me back towards him fast, and we all took off running. We were so fast that I guess the man didn't expect it. The man cursed, yelled, and started running after us. I swear it felt like we ran forever to the entrance, and I felt somewhat relieved that we were that much closer to the school and to safety. But the man was still behind us, and I was sure that he was going to catch up and hurt us for running away. But when I looked back, he had stopped near a bench with a hate-filled look on his face. We finally made it out of the park and just ran straight to the entrance of the school, where one of our teachers, Miss D, was barely making her way out to help with the street crossing. When we saw her, we ran to her, and I just collapsed on the floor sobbing while the boys told Miss D what happened and what the man looked like. Miss D immediately informed the office. The entire school went on lockdown and the cops were called. I stayed glued to Josh while we spoke to the cops and waited for our parents to arrive, and thankfully, the teachers were very understanding of why I needed to be close to my best friend and left us alone. My mum and dad were so scared and furious that this man had tried to take me away, and were thankful that Josh reacted quickly and led us to safety. After that incident, the school took steps to make sure that all the kids were dropped in front of the school safely. The school district sent out letters to parents telling them not to allow us to be in the parks unsupervised, and a patrol car was assigned to our school. Although the cops searched for the man, he was never found, which terrifies me to this day, and I can still remember the look in his eyes as he saw us get away. I don't know what would have happened to me had Josh not been there to protect me, and I am so thankful I had and still have such an amazing friend looking out for me. Back in 1899-1990, I worked for a large drugstore chain. I was about 19 years old, female. As I was a college student, I worked the closing shift, which ended usually at 9 PM. After facing the shelves and counting out the cash drawers, I got out between 9:30 and 10 PM. My home at college was about 25 minutes away, so I would drive this rather desolate highway home. It's busier on the road during the day, but nearly no one on it at that hour. I was driving and saw police lights in my rearview mirror. Thinking back on it, I noticed something was wrong with the lights, but it wasn't enough to really register. I pulled over, but that little voice that keeps you safe was telling me to just proceed with caution. I rolled down my window about 3 inches and waited. The cop approached me, and I was still racking my brain with what I could have done wrong. Probably speeding. The cop walks up to my car, but kind of angles himself, so I had to really turn around in my seat to see him. He was in his mid-30s, clean cut, and wearing a uniform. He asked me to roll my window down further, and I did, another inch. Something about him was just wrong. So wrong. I couldn't really put my finger on it, but then he tried to open my door, and I knew it was wrong. I kept asking him why he pulled me over, and he said that I needed to step out of the car. I told him that I would, but he needed to call backup. He said that I needed to listen to him. I told him again that I would, but I wanted someone else there, and that I was uncomfortable. He started pulling my door handle harder and beating on my window. I was scared for my life, especially because I didn't know if this was a real cop or not. He started screaming for me to get out of the car, now. He tried reaching through the window to grab me, any part of me. As he kept hitting my window, I'm screaming and crying, and had always been such a raw follower that I didn't know what to do. Finally, I gathered all my courage and gunned my car. Back then, I drove an older Mustang, so that thing took off like crazy. I'm pretty sure I ran over his foot in the process. No regrets. Once I got back to the dorm, I told my boyfriend what happened. I was afraid to call the police because I was sure that they were going to arrest me. He called them. They came out to the dorm and took a report. From what I remember, I wasn't the first young woman that this had happened to. And yes, it was a fake cop. I'm so grateful that I listened to that little voice that told me not to roll my window down and told me to take off. It was almost years later that I realized this guy almost certainly had to follow me from where I got off work. How else would he have known that this car had a young female occupant? From what I understand, they never caught him. I just hope he walks with a limp and rethinks targeting young women on empty highways. I work at an outdoor mall in a great neighborhood. You'd assume that it's safe as hell to be here, but then again, you just can't be sure anymore. There are creepy people everywhere, and I just can't help shake the feeling that this isn't my last encounter with this man. I'm 19 years old, and I work at a kiosk that sells all kinds of wonky jewelry. And it's usually teens, young adults, and occasionally some older adults that shop with us. Every once in a while, this man comes up to the kiosk, easily recognizable. Same leather jacket, crinkled corners of his eyes, one front tooth shorter than the other, same slouched way of walking. He's usually harmless, but oh my goodness me, the last few times he's come by have made me so uncomfortable. I greet every customer with, "Hey, can I help you find anything? And most of them say that they're just looking. He always smiles at me and says,
Just looking, darling.
At first it was fine, I didn't care whatsoever. He seemed like a harmless 50 or so year old man. He always spent a very long time looking at the display and never bought anything. Most of the time, I'm working the night shift. At the kiosk, while I'm surrounded by other shoppers and other kiosk workers, mine is kind of all by itself in between two empty ones in the back, and I'm usually left alone, minus the friendly security woman that stops and chats with me on her rounds. She comes by every 30 minutes or so, and she's one of the few friends that I have at work. The only stores in my view are a Reebok and a Macy's. A few nights ago, I was sitting at my kiosk, bored out of my mind, and the security lady had already continued on her way. I had scrolled through Reddit already and was getting ready to open Netflix and continue watching Terrace House when I hear footsteps coming up. I look up to see the creepy man staring at me, but not actually at the kiosk yet. I wave at him and he gives a little smile, but one that sends chills down my spine. A customer walks up and I immediately jump at the chance to help them, trying to shake the creepy feeling I had. After I had checked out the customer and written down the receipt, I glanced up to see the man still staring at me. Before I could say anything, he started walking over, taking my eye contact as permission to come join me.
Evening, darling,
he said, doing an almost bow. Good evening, I told him. He proceeded to do his usual checking the display, not buying anything, etc. Instead of walking around the cart, he stayed by the register where I was, and walked behind my chair to check the sides, but never went where he couldn't see me. Then, he started asking questions like we were long-term friends or something.
So, darling, do you have a boyfriend?
I kind of guffawed at that, because I've been single for over a year now. I told him no, I didn't have a boyfriend, but there was a checkout girl that I found pretty damn cute at my local grocery store.
I see,
he said.
Do you have any plans after work?
He asked me. I was getting uneasy at this point, but I told him yes, I was going to a party.
You gonna hook up with any boys?
He asked. My jaw dropped. Whether or not I was hooking up with any boys was in no way any of his business. But I just told him no. He smiled a little and said,
Good. You're too pretty for them little boys anyway.
He faced me again and came up to hug me. Until this point, I hadn't realized that my heart rate was increasing, and it only became apparent after I found it hard to breathe. Before he could actually do so, Linda, the security woman, walked up and glared at him. Sir, if you're not buying anything from this young woman, I suggest you go loiter somewhere else. He stiffened at the sound of Linda's voice. She's a very intimidating woman. And with that, he left. You're right, honey, she asked. I shrugged. He's always here, I told her. She shook her head. Let me and Russ walk you to your car after work, okay? I nodded, relieved that she offered without me even asking. The rest of my shift is fine. I get through it and manage to make my bosses a bit of money. At 10 o'clock on the dot, Linda and her boyfriend Russ are at my kiosk. They wait for me to pack up my purse and then walk me to my little Prius. They wait for me to drive away as well. On my way to the party, I stop by at a gas station to fill up the tank. As I'm waiting for it to fill, I glance over and see the man from the mall at the minimart. He's buying a pack of cigarettes and he looks out the window and sees me. When he does, he smiles and waves. He holds up one finger, asking me to wait a minute. I don't. I yank out the fuel hose and jump in my car, booking it out of there. I took several detours before arriving 30 minutes late to the party. I had to make sure that I would lose him before showing up there. It's been a few minutes since that happened, and the only reason I'm writing now is because I'm actually working the morning shifts, and I just saw him walk out of the Macy's across from me. Linda has someone biking around this half of the mall, so he won't come near me today. But keep me in your thoughts, guys.